Project Iceworm, the US nuclear base hidden beneath Greenland in the early 1960s, while the world watched the Cold War play out in Berlin and Cuba, a far stranger battle was unfolding in the Arctic. Beneath the frozen surface of Greenland, the US Army was building something the world was never meant to see, a nuclear missile base hidden under the ice. Its codename was Project Iceworm. Officially, it was presented as a scientific research station called Camp Century, the city under the ice, but behind its clean white walls and smiling propaganda films, the real mission was far more sinister: to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles just 1,200 kilometers from Moscow. Engineers carved tunnels out of the glacier using giant drills, buried power stations, laboratories, and living quarters, all beneath 30 feet of ice. The base had its own hospital, mess hall, chapel, and even a barbershop. On paper, it looked like a triumph of American ingenuity. In reality, it was a ticking time bomb. What the US didn't tell Denmark, or even many of its own soldiers, was that the entire structure was shifting, melting, and collapsing under its own weight. The ice was alive, slowly crushing the tunnels, twisting steel, and sealing secrets under layers of frost. And hidden within those frozen corridors was one of the Cold War's greatest deceptions, a project so secret that it would remain classified for over 3 decades. This is the story of Project Iceworm, the US plan to wage nuclear war from beneath the Arctic, and the frozen graveyard it left behind. Welcome to Secrets of the Battlefield. Chapter 1: The Cold War in the Ice. The story of Project Iceworm began at the height of Cold War paranoia. In the late 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an arms race without limits, each side building more missiles, faster bombers, and deeper silos. Both superpowers wanted the ultimate advantage, a place from which they could strike first, or strike back. The Arctic, vast and desolate, suddenly became strategic ground. Greenland, though covered by ice and seemingly lifeless, offered something priceless: location. It sat halfway between North America and the Soviet Union, a frozen bridge that could host radar systems, refueling bases, or even missile platforms aimed straight at Moscow. On paper, Greenland was part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a neutral country. But since World War II, the US military had maintained a quiet presence there, operating Thule Air Base, one of the most northern outposts on Earth. From Thule, American bombers patrolled the skies, ready to respond within minutes if Soviet missiles were ever launched. Still, the CIA and the Pentagon wanted more. In 1958, Army engineers proposed a radical new idea: what if nuclear missiles could be hidden under the ice itself? Protected by nature's thickest shield, invisible to satellites, and capable of surviving a nuclear strike. The plan was audacious. It called for the construction of a massive underground complex stretching 4,000 kilometers of tunnels, enough space to deploy 600 nuclear-tipped Minuteman missiles, each capable of reaching Soviet targets in minutes. The project was given a deliberately harmless name: Iceworm. To disguise it from Denmark and the public, it was folded under a cover program known as Camp Century, officially described as a polar research and scientific base. In 1959, US Army engineers from the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory, CRREL, arrived on site. Their mission: build a city beneath the ice. Using massive snow-cutting machines called Peter plows, they carved trenches up to 30 feet deep, then covered them with steel arches and snow. Within months, they had built a network of tunnels housing barracks, laboratories, dining halls, a communication center, and even a nuclear reactor to power the camp. To the outside world, Camp Century was a marvel of American innovation. Newsreels showed soldiers smiling, drinking coffee, and skiing outside the base. Magazines called it the city under the ice. Visitors saw a model of the future: peaceful science in a frozen wasteland. But the truth was buried deeper. Beneath those tunnels, engineers were secretly testing the feasibility of Project Iceworm, whether the ice could support the weight of missile silos, whether tunnels could stay stable for years, and whether the constant shifting of the glacier would make the whole idea impossible. It didn't take long to find the answer. The Greenland ice sheet wasn't static, it was alive, slowly moving, bending, and compressing under its own weight. Steel beams warped. Floors buckled. Walls cracked. Within a year, entire sections of the camp began to collapse. Still, the US pushed forward. In the logic of the Cold War, even a fragile base under the ice seemed worth the risk if it meant one more advantage over the Soviets. But nature doesn't keep secrets forever. And under the Greenland ice cap, the cracks, both literal and political, were only beginning to spread. Chapter 2 Camp Century, the city under the ice from the air. Camp Century looked like nothing more than a few huts and antennae buried in snow. But beneath that frozen surface stretched an underground labyrinth, one of the most ambitious engineering feats of the Cold War. Built at an altitude of 6,000 feet in northwestern Greenland, the base extended across more than 3 kilometers of tunnels carved entirely into compacted ice. Its architects called it the City of Tomorrow, but its true purpose was far from peaceful research. For the US Army Corps of Engineers, Camp Century was a living laboratory, a test site for something far more secret, Project Iceworm, the plan to hide nuclear weapons under the ice. The camp was divided into sectors, each connected by narrow corridors lined with steel arches and insulated panels. There were 16 main tunnels, each large enough to house machinery, dormitories, and workshops. The base included a communications room, a science lab, a hospital, a barbershop, a library, and even a chapel, all powered by the camp's proudest feature, a portable nuclear reactor, codenamed PM2A. Installed in 1960, the reactor generated electricity, heat, and running water in the middle of a frozen desert. It was the first of its kind, proof that the US could build and sustain a nuclear-powered city anywhere on Earth. At least, that was the theory. In reality, Camp Century was a constant struggle against nature. The temperature inside the tunnels hovered around -20 degrees Celsius, and even minor shifts in the glacier created alarming cracks in the ceilings and walls. Soldiers had to reinforce the structures weekly. Metal beams bent under invisible pressure, and equipment froze within minutes of exposure. Despite the dangers, daily life inside the base was surreal. About 200 soldiers and engineers lived there at a time, isolated for months with no sunlight. They played ping pong, wrote letters home, and joked about living on the moon of Earth, but every one of them knew that Camp Century wasn't built just for science. In sealed sections of the base, the Army was secretly conducting feasibility tests for Iceworm. They experimented with drilling techniques, missile transport tunnels, and frozen launch platforms. Specialized sensors were embedded in the ice to monitor how the glacier moved over time. The results were grim. The ice was far less stable than expected. Even in sub-zero conditions, it flowed and walked like a slow-moving river. Within a year, tunnel roofs began to sag by more than a foot. Doors jammed, floors cracked, and machinery seized from cold deformation. The nuclear reactor leaked small amounts of radioactive coolant, forcing repeated shutdowns. But the Army, driven by Cold War urgency, continued its work. To maintain secrecy, the US government promoted Camp Century as a scientific outpost studying polar conditions and ice dynamics. In 1961, journalists were invited for carefully staged tours. They filmed smiling scientists and clean laboratories, unaware that just meters away, engineers were mapping out hidden missile routes. The Pentagon's propaganda films proudly called Camp Century a triumph of science in the service of peace. No one mentioned the 600 nuclear warheads planned to sit beneath that same ice. Yet nature, and truth, refused to cooperate. By late 1963, parts of the camp were collapsing faster than engineers could repair them. The ice sheet, once thought eternal, was proving to be alive, grinding, shifting, and swallowing everything built upon it. The dream of a secret nuclear base beneath the Arctic was beginning to crack, both literally and politically. And soon, the first secret would start to leak beyond the ice. Chapter 3 Operation Iceworm revealed by 1964, the icy walls of Camp Century were no longer just groaning, they were collapsing. Entire tunnels twisted and buckled under the slow, relentless movement of the glacier. Steel arches deformed like soft clay, and the ceilings sagged dangerously low. Every few weeks, engineers had to rebuild entire sections of the base just to keep it functional. The scientists studying the ice had reached a chilling conclusion: the Greenland ice sheet was not stable enough to support any long-term installation. It moved, imperceptibly, but constantly, crushing anything buried inside it. And yet, the Army's top-secret plan, Project Iceworm, depended entirely on the illusion that the ice would stay still. Behind the scenes, tensions were growing between the Pentagon and the CIA. The intelligence community was skeptical that missiles buried under moving ice could ever remain accurate or even launch safely. Even if they could, secrecy was no longer guaranteed. Danish scientists, working independently, began to suspect that Camp Century wasn't just a research base. Unofficial reports described unusual military shipments arriving through Thule Air Base, equipment far too large for scientific experiments. The United States was walking a dangerous line. Officially, Denmark was a neutral country with strict laws against nuclear weapons on its territory. Unofficially, Washington had built a nuclear reactor and was testing missile systems beneath Danish soil, without permission. The potential diplomatic fallout could be catastrophic. In 1963, Denmark quietly demanded clarification. US officials responded with half-truths and diversions, insisting Camp Century was purely scientific. But behind closed doors, the Department of Defense was already preparing to shut it down. The cost of maintaining the base was skyrocketing, and the ice was swallowing it faster than engineers could fight back. By 1965, the nuclear reactor was removed, packed up in secrecy, and shipped back to the United States. In its place, diesel generators were installed, a quiet sign that the dream of an underground nuclear city was dying. The camp remained operational for a few more years, manned by skeleton crews, until it was finally abandoned in 1967. Within months, the tunnels collapsed, sealing the entire facility under tons of ice. The Pentagon buried Iceworm's records deep within classified archives. For years, no one outside a handful of officials knew what had really been built beneath Greenland. The project became just another ghost story of the Cold War, a frozen secret hidden under the Arctic. Then, in 1995, nearly 30 years later, the truth emerged. Declassified US Army documents revealed the existence of Project Iceworm, the plan to deploy up to 600 nuclear missiles beneath the Greenland ice sheet. The revelation caused a political storm in Denmark. The Danish government, unaware of the true purpose of Camp Century, accused the US of violating its sovereignty and nuclear policy. The public reaction was explosive. Even more alarming, the documents revealed that when Camp Century was abandoned, nothing was removed except the nuclear reactor. Hundreds of thousands of liters of diesel fuel, radioactive waste, chemical coolants, and sewage were left sealed in the ice, an environmental time bomb. The US claimed the waste was safely frozen forever, but scientists knew better. The Arctic was warming, and the ice that once protected those secrets was melting. What had been buried for secrecy was now threatening to return, not as a Cold War secret, but as an ecological disaster. Project Iceworm had failed. But in its failure, it left behind something the military hadn't planned for, a frozen reminder that even the best-kept secrets can eventually melt. Chapter 4 The ice begins to melt. For decades, Camp Century slept beneath the snow, sealed under layers of shifting ice and forgotten maps. To most of the world, it was a Cold War relic, an experiment frozen in time. But time has a way of thawing secrets. By the early 21st century, climate scientists began to notice something alarming. The Greenland ice sheet, once thought stable for millennia, was melting faster than predicted. Temperatures across the Arctic were rising twice as fast as the global average. Ancient glaciers were retreating, rivers were forming where none had ever existed, and deep below the surface, something long buried began to stir. In 2016, researchers from Aarhus University in Denmark and the University of Zurich published a groundbreaking study. They had used advanced climate models and satellite data to pinpoint the exact location of the abandoned US base beneath the ice. Their conclusion shocked both governments. By the end of the century, if current warming trends continue, Camp Century's frozen tomb will melt completely. That meant everything left behind, the diesel fuel, PCBs, sewage, and low-level radioactive waste, could resurface and enter the Arctic ecosystem. Toxic chemicals from the 1950s would flow into newly formed meltwater streams, eventually reaching the North Atlantic. The project, once meant to keep nuclear secrets safe from the Soviets, could end up contaminating the very world it was built to defend. Denmark demanded answers. Greenland, which had since gained partial autonomy, accused both Washington and Copenhagen of negligence. The US response was cautious and diplomatic, acknowledging the study, but denying responsibility. After all, in 1967, when Camp Century was abandoned, climate change wasn't part of the equation. The Army had assumed the ice would remain stable for eternity. But eternity, it turned out, was only about 60 years long. Under the snow, the camp's tunnels still exist, distorted, flooded, and filled with chemical sludge. The wooden structures are collapsing inward, releasing trapped gases and contaminants as the glacier moves. Arctic researchers have described it as a frozen time capsule of the Cold War. Every passing year, it sinks deeper, yet paradoxically, closer to the surface, as the ice above it melts away. The potential risk is enormous. Scientists estimate that over 200,000 liters of diesel, 24 million liters of water contaminated with PCBs, and an unknown quantity of radioactive waste could eventually leak into the environment. Once released, cleaning it up would be nearly impossible. The irony is brutal. A project built to protect the United States from nuclear catastrophe may one day cause an environmental one. The same ice that once hid mankind's deadliest weapons is now revealing them. In a world still haunted by Cold War legacies, Project Iceworm has become something more than a secret base. It's a metaphor, a reminder that what we bury in secrecy, we may one day uncover in consequence. Beneath the Arctic winds, the machinery of Camp Century still lies silent. But as the ice begins to melt, so too does the illusion that we can control the past. And soon, the world may once again face the consequences of a war it thought was long over. Chapter 5: Legacy of the Frozen Water. Day, more than half a century after it was sealed beneath the Arctic, Project Iceworm stands as one of the most haunting symbols of the Cold War, a mix of ambition, secrecy, and arrogance frozen into history. The story of Iceworm is not just about a failed military experiment. It's about the mindset that created it, a time when the world's greatest powers believed technology could solve any problem, and that secrecy could erase any mistake. But nature, as the United States would learn, keeps better records than governments do. When the US abandoned Camp Century in 1967, officials saw it as routine procedure, another classified project, completed and forgotten. But what they left behind, the nuclear waste, the chemicals, the debris, wasn't just physical. It was symbolic of an era when power meant control, and control meant ignorance of consequences. The Cold War transformed the planet in ways that few understood at the time. From underground silos to orbiting satellites, every frontier became a battlefield. The Arctic was no exception, a pristine world turned into a chessboard for superpowers. Iceworm was its boldest move, an attempt to weaponize nature itself. And yet, it failed for the simplest reason: nature does not take orders. The ice moved, the tunnels collapsed, and the secrets it tried to keep were slowly swallowed by the very environment it sought to exploit. Today, as global temperatures climb, Camp Centuries remains sit just below the surface, a frozen time capsule of the Cold War. Scientists have drilled ice cores there, uncovering not just pollutants, but ancient layers of sediment and DNA from plants buried for tens of thousands of years. Ironically, the base that once symbolized humanity's power over nature has now become a research site showing how fragile that balance truly is. For historians, Project Iceworm is a study in duality, the brilliance of its engineering and the blindness of its purpose. The US Army proved that humans could build a functioning city under a glacier, complete with electricity, plumbing, and communication, all powered by a portable nuclear reactor. It also proved that the pursuit of dominance can lead to self-destruction, even when disguised as innovation. The legacy of Iceworm lives on in debates about military secrecy, environmental responsibility, and climate change. It raises uncomfortable questions. How many more secrets are buried in the Arctic? What other remnants of the Cold War still lie under ice, sea, or soil, waiting to be uncovered? When the ice finally melts, whether in 10 years or 50, the world will be forced to confront not only the physical wreckage of Project Iceworm, but also the mindset that created it. A mindset that believed the Cold War could be won not through diplomacy, but through hiding weapons beneath the Earth itself. In the end, Iceworm didn't fail because of the Soviets, or politics, or technology. It failed because it tried to outsmart nature, and nature always wins. The Arctic still holds its silence. But beneath that silence, the ghosts of Camp Century wait, a warning from a frozen past, whispering through melting ice. Beneath the ice project Iceworm was more than a secret, it was a belief. A belief that technology could conquer nature, that secrecy could protect truth, and that power could be buried deep enough to never be found again. For a time, it worked. The tunnels stayed silent, the ice stayed still, and the world never learned what slept beneath Greenland. But the Cold War was never just a battle between nations, it was a war against limits. And no matter how deep you bury your ambitions, the Earth eventually digs them back up. What began as a triumph of engineering ended as a cautionary tale. The ice that once protected humanity from its own fears is melting, slowly revealing what we tried to forget: the waste, the arrogance, the ghosts of a time when men thought they could build fortresses out of frost and silence. Iceworm didn't end with an explosion. It ended with a whisper, the soft sound of ice cracking above a secret that was never meant to thaw. The story of Camp Century isn't just about the past. It's about the future, a reminder that every secret we hide beneath the surface eventually returns to the light. Sometimes in the form of history, and sometimes in the form of consequence. Thank you for watching. If you believe the past should never stay buried, like, share, and subscribe for more stories hidden beneath the battlefield of history.